Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the UN warns that more than 80% of civilian deaths in Sudan at just the start of this year were down to drone attacks, as it pushes calls for both sides of the country's brutal war to roll back on the warfare. The conflict itself continues to drag on. Also, about 72,000 people crossed over into Ceuta last week, and though most have been sent back, the crisis has put pressure on Spain from within its political party, and also stresses on how to deal with more than 1,000 young people who are unable to legally be deported from the Spanish enclave. But first, more than 80% of civilian deaths in Sudan at the start of this year were down to drone attacks. The UN says that it's become the leading cause of death in the country, with the aircraft used by both sides in Sudan's deadly civil war. Now, the army and the RSF paramilitary have been battling for control since 2023, and the damage continues to rack up. Naba Mohedin brings us the latest.
The war in Sudan is showing no sign of slowing down. Instead, fighting is becoming increasingly destructive, with drone attacks causing more widespread and indiscriminate damages, raising concerns for civilians far beyond the front lines. As both sides continue to rely on advanced weapons, the international attention is turning to how those arms are reaching the battlefield. There is pressure by international community on countries accused of supplying weapons to Sudan, including the United Arab Emirates, as diplomats look for ways to reduce the flow of arms and lower the intensity of the fighting. Those efforts come at a critical point, as peace initiatives have largely stalled. Hope for a sustained ceasefire have faded, leaving the humanitarian situation even worse, as humanitarian agencies warn that civilians are bearing the brunt of the fighting and paying the highest price. Millions of Sudanese people are still in need for food and lack medicine, food, facing many shortages. And of course, the insecurity and the ongoing fighting continue to make huge challenges to international organizations to operate and reach those in need. The message from diplomats is clear. Reducing the number of weapons entering the conflict in Sudan could create a space for renewed negotiations and improve the humanitarian access. But for now, there is little sign that both sides is prepared to make concessions and scale back military operations. So while international efforts continue to improve the situation and to reach a political settlement, and of course, first of all, to make a humanitarian truce, the reality on the ground is different. Fighting continues and intensifying. Civilians are paying the highest price, and millions of people are still stuck in different conflict zones. The situation in Sudan is not improving, and it needs more coordination by international community and more pressure to stop the fighting and help millions of people across the country.
Naba Mohedin there for us. Now, fallout from last week's migrant crisis in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta has seen MPs from the country's Sumar party present a motion urging the government to reconsider hosting the 2030 World Cup with Morocco. Now, about 72,000 people crossed over its border into Ceuta in the hopes of making it to Europe last week. Although most have since been sent back, more than 100 people died, and 6 days after the mass arrival, Spain's still trying to work out what to do with over 1,000 unaccompanied minors who remain in Ceuta as they can't legally be deported. Many are lodged in makeshift accommodation or sleeping rough as reception centres struggle to cope.
There's pregnant women and young girls alone in the streets. We are trying to look after them and listen to them and see how we can help.
I've taken children to authorities, but they told us no, because everything was so saturated. So many people arrived. It's half a population. The authorities cannot handle this either. I've been spending nights in the street with the children. A girl is sleeping inside my car for safety. I build places where they can spend the nights with blankets and provide them with food. They use the air conditioning from the car because they have nowhere to be.
A look now at some news in brief. FIFA chief Gianni Infantino held crisis talks in Morocco on Wednesday with other directors from the footballing body as he scrambles to muster support amidst a tidal wave of pressure for his exit. Now, he's been dodging enormous backlash over his leadership since he floated the idea to sell off commercial rights to the World Cup to private investors. Now, that's been scrapped, but calls for him to step down continue. Along with Spain and Portugal, Morocco is set to co-host the 2030 World Cup, and its FA chief is one of the few still backing Infantino's re-election amidst the controversy. He's reportedly offered the kingdom the right to host the World Cup final in exchange for that support. At the corruption trial of South Africa's former defence minister and military veterans, on Wednesday, prosecutors told the court of the luxury home renovations that Nosiviwe Mapisa Kakula allegedly paid for in cash from alleged kickbacks. The figure, including over 30,000 euros worth of curtains, came from an interior designer who reportedly oversaw the upgrades. Mapisa Kakula, who retired in 2024, faces 12 counts of corruption involving the equivalent of about 236,000 euros. And Kenyan farmers are skeptical about concerns that the recent deaths of 15 elephants may have been caused by cyanide from pesticides used in nearby farmland. The deaths happened in Amboseli National Park near the Tanzanian border, which is home to some of Africa's most famous elephant herds. Staying with South Africa, the government's pushing for Africa-wide talks while seeking to manage the fallout over anti-immigration protests that have forced many migrants to leave the country and caused diplomatic tensions with some of its counterparts on the continent. South Africa's faced a backlash over protests calling for the deportation of migrants who are in the country illegally and reported violent attacks against them. But officials believe that wider talks on the matter amongst all nations on the continent could address the broader issues more thoroughly.
Is not a South African phenomenon. What we are disagreeing with is to isolate it and make it a South Africa phenomenon, particularly through the intervention of Ghana. When you look at it, is that we because we are one of the highest receiving countries in the continent, therefore we end up being the ones that are mostly discussed.
And finally, in Cape Verde, almost nothing remains of the picture-perfect postcard image of some of the beaches on the island of Santiago. For decades, the illegal extraction of sand for construction has been eroding the coastline, as Clem Waller tells us.
At low tide, these women wait and watch for the waves to recede. Nicknamed the sand thieves, they rush into the water to scoop up the last remaining patches of black sand. Once their buckets are full, they carry several dozen kilos on their heads to sell to construction contractors. Although this activity is prohibited in Cape Verde, for many, it remains their only source of income.
Sometimes we're physically exhausted, but we come anyway. We're in pain, but the next day we come back because if we don't, we won't earn any money.
Years of unchecked extraction have left their mark on the landscape. The natural barrier that once protected the coastline has weakened over time as the beaches gradually disappeared. Saltwater now seeps inland, gradually drying out the soil and causing significant damage to the environment.
Cape Verde is a country where it does not rain enough during the year, and if the rain does not fall, it won't wash the salt out of the soil, resulting in poor quality water. This is why sand collection has disastrous consequences for agriculture and for the lives of farmers.
Advocacy groups have condemned Praya's inaction and are calling for a concrete solution for these sand collectors, who say they feel marginalized and left with no other means to earn a living.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks very much for joining us, though, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.